Let's talk about the Rust paradox in the age of AI coding and break down some very interesting developments. So, in terms of Rust, one of the big complaints is it's a very difficult language. Many people acknowledge that it has significant benefits in terms of safety and the way it handles memory through ownership. Also, that it's very performant. It has C-level performance or even better in many cases. Very efficient memory usage as well. So it really, blows away scripting languages like Python and Ruby, and that's why a lot of Python itself is now being rewritten in Rust. But there's a paradox here where we hear these doom and gloom stories about programming jobs being automated, but at the same time, Rust is too hard to learn. Something doesn't make sense, right? So we have on one hand people saying that programming is going to go away, but then Rust is too difficult to learn. The two things cannot be true. And really, what this means is that there's an opportunity for people to really level up. And I think that's what we're seeing in 2025 is the rise of the Rust tooling engineer. So let's talk about what a tooling engineer is and also some of the key things that are popping up and also how you can learn Rust using the Pragmatic AI Labs platform. So first up here, why is Rust growing despite AI taking over some of the coding? We see that tons of new users are joining Rust communities in 2024. Major companies, Microsoft, AWS, Google, Cloudflare, Canonical are using Rust, and just it continues to rise. We see that the Linux kernel now accepts Rust, and it's a really big deal because the Linux kernel was C for decades, and this is becoming a bigger and bigger deal for systems like Linux. The other thing that we're seeing as well is that it's not easy to ignore Rust, even in languages like Python. For example, the new Python linter rough can be 10 to 100 times faster. So it's so fast, sometimes you don't even know that it ran. The UV package installer is widely acknowledged to be exponentially better than tools like Conda or Python virtual environments. And if we look at things like polars, they're also blowing away the speed of tools like pandas. So in terms of data analysis, these kinds of tools in Rust are really making strides. And so what does this mean? It means that these speed improvements are going to make developers much more productive. And this is where we see the rise of the tool engineer. So even if maybe people in your company are using scripting languages, and maybe they're not going to hire for those scripting languages, are they going to hire for a tools engineer? And I would say yes. I would say that's probably one of the most valuable jobs you could hire into is a tooling engineer in Rust in 2025, because you can use generative AI tools to help you develop, and the tools you're going to develop could go 10 100 times faster. Also, things that are serverless, for example AWS Lambda or Google Cloud Functions or Kubernetes, if you write those serverless functions in Rust, they could run so fast that they could open up new possibilities that didn't exist before for serverless, because the CPU and memory usage was too much for a scripting language. So let's get into this paradox though and dive into a few things about it. So I think we're seeing this doom and gloom story from people that largely are either not programmers, so the CEO of Anthropic, or the CEO of Nvidia, who is a CEO, not a not a programmer, or you're seeing people who are selling things, right? So in the case of Nvidia, they've got to sell the hype. Magic is coming, you know, uh, all kinds of robots and et cetera, et cetera. So either this idea of programming going away is coming from people who are not software developers professionally, and they've never worked as software developers and they don't understand the complexity, or they're selling something and they want the hype to continue so that the stock price will continue to rise, right? Those are really the categories of people. I don't see people who are deep experts saying programming is going to be automated. In fact, it's very difficult to find someone who's a deep expert with decades of programming experience saying programming is automated. It's almost like a truth serum for somebody who is a con artist to see if they're going to say programming jobs are going to be automated. Now, let's go ahead and also talk about the other side of the paradox, which is Rust has a reputation for being hard to learn. So something's not making sense here. Either programming is automated or Rust is too hard to learn. Like, what does this mean? The truth is in the middle here, in that AI is making some parts of programming easier and some parts more automated, just like the interactive development environments or CI/CD or cloud computing or faster machines, right? And so it's just that programming is changing. And what we could think about is programming splitting up a little bit or morphing, where some parts of app development, like user experience, basic applications, they're becoming more AI assisted, like boilerplate code, almost like an abstraction, like a scripting language or a web framework. But then the systems programming, and this is where the real hardcore stuff comes into play, infrastructure, high performance tools, you still need a human. And the reason why you still need a human is that AI coding tools have no intelligence. All they're doing is in multi-dimensional space finding a pattern. How could finding a pattern be intelligence, right? There's no reason for it. It would be like saying K-means clustering is a financial advisor. It's nonsense. So the human still has to put all that together. And with systems programming, the details do matter. So even though you may get a really good idea, it doesn't mean that the human doesn't have to observe it. It's similar to using a tool like AutoCAD, where if you're using a tool like AutoCAD, it's amazing because you can do all these really complex drawings and things that would take you a lot of time to do. But still, the electrical engineer has to look at the drawing and make sure that everything maps up. So it's just a tool for experts is what we're seeing more with the coding assistants. And we see that AI also struggles with precision, control, safety because of hallucinations, and that's exactly what Rust provides. So in many ways, the complaints or the fear and the uncertainty and the doubt is actually, in a sense, wind at the back of Rust, because it's driving people into a language that directly addresses many of those things. So let's think about now, why learn Rust if AI can code? Well, one is that Rust solves many problems that AI can't handle. For example, memory safety, right, without slowing down. In the case of many companies, this becomes a significant issue in production. Is garbage collection starts to eat up the CPU. It starts to cause, strange side effects. But with Rust, that doesn't exist. So you could convert current systems to Rust. It also prevents bugs at compile time. So instead of finding them later, you can actually pay up front, which is what you want. Like it's a savings account. It also has guaranteed thread safety for multi-core processing. This is why I'm a skeptic of adding multi-threaded to languages like Python. Is, first of all, you don't even have a compiler. So why would I want to add threads where now I'd have no protection against race conditions? You have no type checking built into your language. It's a bolt-on. You have the concept of variables that can be constantly replaced. You have no immutable variables. It doesn't even make sense in the era of generative AI coding to add all these tools that only make sense for languages like Rust. So we can see people shifting more and more towards systems programming in languages like Rust. And we also have the investment. So again, we hear over and over again, learning Rust is so hard. Although I would argue with that, we have a lot of courses on Pragmatic AI Labs. In fact, probably the most courses you're ever going to find on Rust, including AI and data engineering and MLOps, all on the Rust language, and continue to grow. WebSockets, WebAssembly. And the reason why we picked Rust is we think it's so important, and it's an investment that's going to pay off. So it's harder up front, but it's going to save the debugging time later. And companies are training engineers in Rust despite the advances. So if you look at a lot of the job openings that I'm seeing all over the place in 2025, Rust, 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 and the Rust skills are going to command a higher value because some of the more simple skills like Python programming become more automated. So it's really a reframing of what's happening with programming, in that I think a good question would be, why did people use Python for 20 years? Is that we thought that the readability was the primary reason to use a language like Python. But now, if we're not reading the code as much, we're more reviewing the code and morphing the code and changing the code and observing that it works at scale. Why wouldn't we use a language that's the most strict, most performant, and most safe? And so, in many ways, you can think of Rust as the perfect accidental complement to AI coding. So, if we look at the future, it's very likely Rust and AI is going to work much more closely together. AI is going to make Rust easier to learn and use. And again, I have lots of examples of this on the Pragmatic AI Labs platform, including how to build Rust large language model tools that allow you to talk to Ollama locally, and also how to burst out to Bedrock so you can use the same code base on either platform. So we'll see that people are starting to even build large language model workflows using Rust. And Rust also provides guardrails that make AI generated code safer. And the most valuable developers are going to know when to use AI and also when to use Rust. So, in a nutshell, when programming is going to change, like it's changed for the last several decades, the hard parts are going to become more valuable. A lot of times people don't want to focus on the hard things because they're difficult. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. Likewise, with Rust, it's going to excel exactly where AI is currently falling short. So many people that don't want to learn Rust, maybe they'll be left behind. And the paradox isn't a paradox, it's just a natural evolution in how software gets built. So, really, to sum things up here, at Pragmatic AI Labs, we have just a tremendous amount of Rust programming. We really believe in Rust. We think it's the future. The data also supports it, that Rust is on the rise. So go ahead and check out some of the courses we have on the platform. We also are developing labs that help you learn Rust as well. And we are fully committed to using Rust in the era of generative AI coding assistance.